Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hormone Genius podcast. Teresa and I are here today to talk about something that comes up a lot in my world, especially when I go and speak on campuses or I'm talking to friends. There's always these misconceptions that come up about charting the cycle. And so today, Teresa and we want to talk about how we can demystify some of these common misconceptions about cycle charting in hopes that those of you who love your cycle and love our podcast feel like they have some good talking points and ways to maybe lovingly respond to some of these misconceptions that come your way. So, Teresa, are you ready to rock and roll with this thing?
I'm ready. I'm letting you, Jamie's going to be the lead on this one because she's awesome at this kind of stuff, and sometimes I just want to sit back and let Jamie do her thing. So this is one where I'm like, Jamie, let's do this, and I will sit in the background and add whatever I can, but I feel like you are the powerhouse in this content.
Oh, Teresa, thank you for saying that. It's so nice. Well, I think we make a good pairing. And when you initially asked me to do a podcast with you, it just was like a perfect combo pack because, you have your expertise with, you're a women's health nurse practitioner. You have so much science behind that. And I think for me, I love the idea of how do we market and package this information? How do we bring people in and we're so attractive to others about how cool our body is. And so that's something I'm really passionate about. All right, so let's just dig right in, ladies. Let's start with number one. Often, and I would think this misconception would be imagined to come up as maybe a primary misconception, but in my experience, it isn't necessarily. But the misconception of, isn't it a church thing? Isn't it a church thing? So, often, charting our cycle and maybe not using birth control as a way to avoid pregnancy, but using fertility charting as a way to avoid pregnancy may be seen as a religious move, something we do because of our faith. And while that may be very true for many people, it's not the only reason to chart the cycle, nor does it even have to be a motivating factor. And so something I like to think about a lot is that really charting our cycle, and Teresa and I both have this very strong opinion and belief, it's proven charting our cycle is a woman's health thing. It's not like a church thing. It's a woman's health thing that some denominations, religions, they honor. But it's not in and of itself a church thing. It's a woman's health thing. And Teresa, something I love to say all the time when I'm talking to groups of people, specifically like college aged, I love talking to the college aged men and women, is like our uterus doesn't have a religion. Like it doesn't vote a certain party. It is what it is. It doesn't have a religion. So our uterus is going to function in the way, and our ovaries and our fallopian tubes, our reproductive organs, because we're a woman, tell us vital things about our body, and it's not taking into account our faith or religion or our religious or our political affiliation or anything like that. Do you find that to come up often, Teresa? Like as you're speaking and sharing with others about this, is this a misconception that you hear often, or is it not so much the case anymore?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in some ways it's not a misconception in the reality that many of the people in the last probably 30, 40, 50 years who have come to using a natural system have had religious reasons
Mm-hmm.
or motivations
Mm-hmm.
for it. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a truth behind that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the misconception is that, that has to be the only motivation. And like you said,
Right.
Jamie, from a medical standpoint, like I believe that the human body was created very complex and good, and it's so detailed, right? There's just so many. I mean, this is why medicine is so huge and science is ever evolving. But natural systems have evolved as well. And I think that's where the issue has come. Like there was a misconception about how natural systems worked. And in the past, they didn't work as well as they do now. And so we
Right.
have a situation where, from a medical standpoint, you can cooperate with your body. And we want to cooperate with our heart, with our GI system, because when we cooperate with the body works as it should in perfection, in a sense, or as best in perfection as it can. and you feel well and you feel happy when you do those things.
Right.
Since the science of natural fertility systems has really exploded in the
Mhm.
last, like, especially 15 to 20 years, I think the misconception is that somehow, this is an old thing, this is a religious thing, and that, I can't do it because that's the motivation. But that's now not the case. And there's lots of motivations to want to use a natural way of family planning. And I
Right.
think it's a good thing, but many people just don't know it yet. Right. And
Right.
that's why we do this podcast, because they're like, I've never heard this before. What are you talking about? Isn't that something
Right.
that people just did for this religious reason? So
Right.
this is like opening that up and saying, nope, this is a whole new kind of ball of wax.
Exactly. Exactly. And I thought, as I shared at the beginning of the episode, I thought, as I was getting trained as a fertility awareness instructor through Creighton and all these things, I thought that misconception or misunderstanding that this is only for people who practice a certain religion, I thought that would come up more. But then as I would reflect on my caseload, I would say less than 50% of my clients actively would share with me that was the reason why they were charting. Often they were coming to us because of a health concern. So I remember a time, a really good friend of mine, she was a stranger at the time. I was teaching a Creighton method introductory session, and her then fiance, they were encouraged, actually, I think it was a requirement to go and learn at least the introductory session of some fertility awareness based methods as engaged couple. And so she told me later that she was so not wanting to go. I mean, she literally, in her head, she thought she was going to walk into this basement of a random church, and the woman teaching, which was me, would be wearing like a prairie dress. Not that there's anything wrong with prairie dresses, but look a certain way and talk a certain way, and that she would feel so completely uncomfortable, like she didn't fit in. And she confessed to me later that actually was not the case, and she was not able to stop thinking about that experience. I remember months after that, and again, she and her fiance were just one couple of like five maybe that day. 3 months later, she called and said, I cannot stop thinking about what I learned. I cannot stop thinking about it. My fiance and I, we're going to start charting. We're going to start seeing you. And I'm going to tell you, that was the last thing I ever would have expected to happen. Teresa, crazy thing. Guess what? She's a fertility care practitioner now. Like, that's how it works. I mean, that's just what happens. And so, again, just as a tip for those of you who love all of this, like, and again, if it's a deep love, then you may be finding it's definitely a faith thing, a conviction thing, and a health thing. But just a tip for you, if you have a friend that's coming and they're like, I just don't fit into that mold, I don't fit into the quote unquote type, help them understand that the cycle is valuable and a vital data point, not just for their fertility, but for the state of their health. And I think if we can elevate these fertility awareness systems to help people understand, truly it is for our health and for our well-being, and just for knowing our cycle and our body and our health, that is a great way for any of you listeners to start if you are sharing this with a friend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a huge motivation is just not taking synthetic hormones. If that has to be one of the biggest
Yeah.
motivations now, it's
Mm-hmm.
that women are like, I don't think this like jives with my organic living. So if it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
jive with it, like, what am I going to do instead? And
Exactly.
I feel like that's the newest and greatest motivation for people wanting to learn about these, fertility awareness based methods.
Totally. 100%. Okay, cool. So, first one, isn't it a church thing? So, we just answered that question. No, it's a women's health thing, and it can be a perfect integrated piece of our life. The second one that we hear often is, I'm not ready to get pregnant now, so cycle tracking isn't for me. So, I hear this often after, again, giving a talk, giving talks to college students or people who are preparing for marriage. And what I note mostly is the fear in their voice. And so I want to affirm you and just say, I see you. If you are nervous or scared about getting off of birth control, it can be scary, especially if you've never come to understand or learn about the genius of your hormones and the genius of the rhythm of your hormones when it tells you when your body and when you're fertile and versus infertile. So I want to say, and Teresa and I are going to spend some time talking about here, just the effectiveness of these natural systems. And so again, if you are thinking that you can't practice a natural system because you're in fear of becoming pregnant, I want to tell you that these systems can be very effective when you understand your body, and even more effective when you're working with somebody trained in these systems. So let's kind of dig into that one, Teresa. Of the people that you work with, what percentage of people would you say are coming to you, getting, learning about fertility awareness or working with somebody doing so to avoid pregnancy versus people who are trying to use their cycle to understand when to achieve pregnancy?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the people that I'm seeing are coming for health reasons because that's what I'm requesting them to do. But I, in the past, when I taught the Creighton model system, I had a lot of people coming just for, using it to avoid or achieve pregnancy. So yeah, I mean, I think what everyone needs to understand is that fertility is biological, and biological is not going to change. Like our bodies work in a certain way, and that doesn't change. And any sort of birth control does have a failure rate. And I think what the most common misconception is that fertility awareness-based methods have a different failure rate than other birth control methods. And there are nuances between them, of course, but what the most common misconception is that somehow there's no way that just naturally charting your cycle could ever be as effective as taking a pill, or putting an implant into your arm or taking a shot. And that's the one that needs to be dispelled. Now, caveat, yes, there's a different route of administration, in a sense, of how we go about using a natural system. There is also a different, in some ways, motivation to do it in a way that leads to an effectiveness that is similar to birth control. Right. So those two things kind of have to be understood. And when people come into a natural system, yeah, you cannot, we say it a lot on this podcast, there's no winging it. If you are using it to avoid pregnancy, that means that just like if you were going to take a birth control pill and it says on there, take it at the same time every day, because if you don't, the effectiveness will drop. If you skip a pill, and I know somebody, a lot of people who have accidentally missed a pill, and then that's the one day, then it fails, right? Well, then it's not on the system, right? It's not on the pill itself. It's on the fact that it wasn't used correctly. So just like that, in a natural system, we know that the effectiveness is extremely high to avoid pregnancy when people use a system that's credibly and scientifically validated, and they work with an instructor to help them, not just once, not just twice, but just in a really like a relationship way. Hey, like, I know something changed in my life, something changed in my chart. I'm going to be calling the teacher or texting the teacher. Right. So that's the beauty of it, is that, and there are people all over that are trained to do this well. And you have to do of course, the education and find those people, but there's people like us out there that want to help you to do that.
Amen. It is so true. It is so true. And again, like these natural systems, when practiced correctly, like Teresa said, they can be 95-ish to 99% effective, just as effective as hormonal contraception. So just like Teresa said, I mean, it's really the user effectiveness that's really going to indicate the effectiveness for that person. And again, there's also these other side benefits of using these systems for avoiding pregnancy rather than birth control, and that you get to understand the natural flow of your cycle. And there's so much information your body is trying to tell you about the state of your health. Something else that I love now as like years progress is femtech. I am getting really into this femtech stuff. Oh my gosh, Teresa, truly. So I personally use the Inito monitor, INITO, Inito. Okay. And the moment I heard about this monitor, and there are other monitors similar to it, It tests your urine. So the Anito monitor has like a thingamajig, it's what I call it, this little mechanism that attaches to your phone. You pee on a stick, and then you put the stick in the thingamajig, and the thingamajig connects with your phone, and then it pulls up, it plots your hormone levels, your FSH, your LH, your progesterone, your estradiol. And throughout the cycle, you can see where these hormones are plotted. And it's a very effective and efficient way to get a snapshot into your hormones, and it also saves a lot of trouble. So again, in the olden days, when I say olden days, I mean like 10 years ago, the only real option, I think, Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, was if you wanted to confirm ovulation, you would need to do what we call a family planning lab. That means you go and you get your blood drawn and you look to see, I mean, confirming ovulation, you can actually get an ultrasound, but I mean, with blood work, you can see, okay, if ovulated, my progesterone levels are a certain amount, which means that if I have serious reason to avoid pregnancy, I cannot get pregnant, that it would be 100% effective because you know that you've ovulated already. And now, if you're again avoiding pregnancy, this would be a time you could have intercourse. But what I love about these femtech monitors, and they don't really market themselves as a method or a tool of avoiding pregnancy, just as a little FYI, and I probably for lots of reasons. But anyway, my husband and I love to use it because we can see when that progesterone rises, and I don't have to wonder or question. I'm still checking my mucus. I still love my creatine chart, but there's just something so empowering about knowing where my levels are. So Femtech, again, is amazing. If you want a discount from Anito, we can include a code in the write-up. I don't know if you know that, Teresa, but we have a code that people can get a discount, 15%, I think, discount.
That's great. And I mean, I think the femtech industry is, I mean, like, this is another reason why, natural systems are not going away. In 2022, it was a $37 billion like growth in terms of income from companies that are, in this area of business, and it will grow by 15 to 20% each year. They're thinking it's just a huge industry. And yeah, that Anito monitor, super cool. And I think what I want to say also, and this is somewhat of a misconception, but also just a forewarning of people like Jamie and I that have lived literally in the education of fertility, for us to like have learned how to chart our mucus, have learned about tracking your temperature. We already are like so knowledgeable or body literate in this area that jumping in and looking at an Anito monitor and using it, it's like just adding another tool into already a really full tool belt.
Right.
And that's the one thing I would just say. So for those of you who are completely not body or cycle literate at this point, which is fine, because again, you didn't get this information. It's not anything that we would expect you to have. You can't just jump in usually easily to use a femtech thing and be like, oh my gosh,
Right.
like I understand how this all works. You have to have a foundational understanding of your cycle and how all of the biomarkers of your body can tell us where you're at. And then I think appropriately adding like the Anito monitor would really help. Does that jive what you would think, Jamie, in terms of that?
Totally.
That's just what I think about. Like, I'm like, just careful. Don't just go out and get the Anito monitor. If you don't know how to track your cervical mucus, I feel like that's a real problem.
Right. Definitely. I think the powerhouse duo would definitely be, first and foremost, working with somebody who teaches you how to chart. I mean, literally, you might think, oh, I can read a book, or I can, check up things online or whatever. I am telling you, it'll take, 6 months or a year with spaced out meetings, but it is going to be so worth your time. It will, okay, I can't guarantee it's going to change your life, but it changed mine, And so it just changed my life. It gave me a new understanding of not just my fertility, but like my feminine nature. It gave me an inside scoop into the mystery and beauty of my body as woman. And so it was a very deep, and again, not everyone's going to have such a deep experience in that way, but it was like that for me. So I think if I had jumped into femtech right away, I would have been skipping some really important parts. So for those of you, like Teresa said, I love that. This encouragement is to work with somebody. And again, there's so much power. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, Teresa. There's so much power and beauty in community. specifically for women. And I've known that always. I always say, healing in isolation is nearly impossible. But when you have community, we can heal. And with hormone coaches that I trained, same thing for learning. Learning on your own is possible, but it's expedited and becomes much more rich when you do it as a group. And so same thing for learning your cycle, not even as a group, but just with another person, that accompaniment. That's where I think this true like beauty and learning and like fullness can come from, is connecting with another woman who sees you and can hold space for you. There's so much power there. And so I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't think we would have talked about that part. It's so beautiful to find somebody to work with. And again, there's so many directories, and we'll talk about that toward the end of how you find somebody. Okay, cool. So just as a recap, even if you're not trying to get pregnant, these cycles, again, or these methods are so great for avoiding pregnancy. And again, there's a bunch of side benefits, but also things you want to know too first before jumping right into femtech, for instance. All right, so the third thing that we want to talk about is sometimes a misconception is that this is guesswork. And so far, we shared some reasons why it's not guesswork, but over 100 years ago, or about 100 years ago, there was something called the rhythm method. And this really was guesswork. And so we want to maybe not spend too much time here, because I think we're proving our point that charting our cycle isn't guesswork. But truly, like my grandma and grandpa, they had great blessing. My other grandma and grandpa had 12 children. Again, blessing, lived in different times. But I know, having talked to my grandma of 9, she did talk about how she thinks that, man, if I just understood my cycle, or understand how to plan pregnancies so I could give myself time after I have a baby, there'd be just so much power and beauty there. So even though these women and these families had many, many children, and children are blessings, of course, there are natural ways, and they're not the same ways that were used 100 years ago, because medical science advances. And like Teresa said at the beginning, so does fertility awareness-based methods. There's been advancements.
Right.
Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I think just what just very much always shows this thing about the rhythm method, because it's literally still in our face. Like, this is the weird thing about it, is like we are still looking at rhythm methods all the time, and that is in the cycle tracking apps. If someone is confused and doesn't understand the nature of their own fertility, they might jump on, grab a menstrual tracking app, and think that that menstrual tracking app predicts when they are fertile.
Right.
And it doesn't. This is exactly what the rhythm method was. It takes retrospective cycle information to predict a future event. And that's very much not going to work if you have any change in your cycle from cycle to cycle, which we know happens all the time. In fact, I'm in a cycle right now and I'm hitting my perimenopause years, where I'm delaying ovulation. And had I not been just watching my body, and if I just used a menstrual tracking app, because I've been ovulating on day 12, literally for the last 3 years. And if I just ignored my body and just said, oh, the app or whatever is telling me I'm still ovulating on day 12, that's where people become pregnant, and where methods like the rhythm method didn't work. So, again, as much as Jamie and I, we're not huge fans of artificial birth control for a lot of reasons. It did allow women to get out of some really difficult situations with childbearing, and allow women to rise up to really be respected in culture, to provide so many things. But in some ways, a lot of times we overtip the balance. We're swinging the pendulum, and the pendulum's swinging forward. And we're like, this is great. This is great. Women have empowerment and freedom and And then it just kind of swings a little too far. And I think you could say, at least I would say, that with contraception and birth control, the pendulum swinged a little too far, because we forgot about the health of women. Yeah. We forgot about the health of women, not only from the standpoint of just their ability to be creative and co-create with human beings and produce human beings, which are important because if we don't produce human beings and we're in a fertility decline right now all over the globe, then the globe doesn't continue. Like we can't just have old people getting old. There has to be a next generation. So we can overtip the balance in terms of like, hey, we got to create human beings, people. This is important because there are a lot more people. In fact, that's the biggest segment of people right now in terms of fertility, and what's changed is the people having no children at all. Like certainly we have less children than we did back in your grandma's generation, but the biggest growth or segment of people is just people not having no children at all. And yes, that is a choice. But however, those people will have no one to take care of them. So guess what? We're all taking care of them. We're taking care of them. So I mean, we have to like just kind of think through these things and just like look at the big picture. And then we forgot that women have bodies that were made good and that we don't need to put chemicals in the body to destroy their fertility, to destroy their health in so many ways. So I think the pendulum really swung really far there, Jamie. And, you know, that's where we just want to like women, we need to be respected, yes, and have empowerment, have control of our bodies and have control of fertility, but we need to do it in a way that respects their bodies and their health.
Right. And one in which we're not measured next to man. We can't be measured next to something that we're not exactly like, or something that we're not striving to be. We're complementary. And so that's what's so cool too with the onset of birth control. You know, there were like warriors in the women's healthcare field that felt like, okay, this isn't not good for women. Like, what are some alternatives that are integrative that help us get to the root cause of hormone imbalance? That came later, but truly what's just the alternative to spacing pregnancy that is actually effective? And so that's what's so cool is what came out of that, you know, 1960s era, in the 70s especially, were systems that used science, not just guesswork, like the rhythm method. Like Teresa said, rhythm method, you assume every woman has the same number of days and the same days during the calendar month. These are the days you're fertile. It doesn't matter what you're seeing biologically. They didn't even understand biologically what indicated fertility. So in the 70s, there was just so much science that went into it. So ladies, truly, the systems that you're using to chart right now, thank you to the like warriors in this movement in the 70s, because it wasn't that long ago. Like it was the 70s, you know, it's crazy. So it's so true. So basically this misconception of the rhythm method, and again, it's going to take years and years for this to be completely out of our narrative, Teresa. I remember as I was getting trained as a master's student, that was the main response of the doctors and nurses when I asked them, why don't you disseminate this information for your female patients? Why is this not something or an option at the very least? And the doctors, besides one, all of them, besides one said, well, because it's the rhythm method. It's guesswork. I'm like, wow, this thing that was used almost 100 years ago is still in the narrative. And again, there's a lot more to that. So that is another misconception. So we can trust our body. We can trust the signs of our fertility. And when things are wonky, we can get the care we need. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right. So the fourth misconception is my doctor hasn't said anything about it. So I'm going to share a story. This misconception of my doctor hasn't told us anything about it or told me anything about it during an appointment. Again, it's all starting to make sense, I hope, in your mind as you're listening. A lot of these misconceptions really do connect with one another. So the story that I have that I want to share is that when I was preparing to get married, Teresa, my husband and I was getting my master's, like I said, and we weren't married yet, but I thought I'm going to study this fertility awareness method thing, study 5 different methods, compare them to one another, see what's most effective. And like I said, I'm going to interview doctors and yada, yada. So through that whole process, I came to learn very much so that these systems are effective, they're safe, and 51% of doctors don't even learn about them in med school. Okay, so those are the 3 main things I learned. So I had all of this information. I had like a fire in my bones, a passion in my heart, and I was just so focused on this detriment to women when I was in my like mid-20s, young to mid-20s. So I went to the doctor in preparation of my wedding night. So my husband and I, we waited for marriage to have sex. And so I'm going to the doctor. I'm nervous because I'm thinking, okay, like I'm preparing for my wedding night and I need to apparently, get checked out, make sure everything's functioning fine. And I will never forget it, Teresa. I was talking to the doctor I had at the time, was a woman. She's very kind and I like her a lot as a person. And she's like, well, what birth control can I prescribe you? And I'm like, oh, no. I don't need birth control. Like I'm going to practice fertility awareness methods. Like that's how we're going to avoid pregnancy to start. And she laughed. And she laughed. She looked at me like I was from outer space. And she said, like, if you don't want to have 13 children, you need to be on birth control. She like so diminished my A desire, but B, she diminished unknowingly the intellect that I have gained through the full year of this was my full soul focus the whole year. And in that moment, Teresa, I knew that I knew more about this topic than my doctor. I just did. And would make sense. Anybody who studies something for so long and is totally immersed in it is going to be in this area all the time. But that was the moment I realized, holy smokes, like we need to provide better for women. And it wasn't that she was just on the birth control bandwagon, because she's not a bad woman. She's lovely. But it was how she dealt with me in that moment. I felt so like dumb. But actually that feeling I got it did not demean me. It made me mad, but not mad in a rude way, mad in a righteous, like, got to do something about this kind of way.
Do you
So,
remember, Jamie, how you like literally verbally responded to her?
yeah, I do. And I said, actually, there are natural systems. And I told her I was studying this as a master student. I said, no, these are very effective systems. And I said I would just send her some articles, and I did, and so
have a response to that?
no.
Yeah, just
And
no,
then,
whatever.
yeah. Shortly after, I switched to a different provider because I thought this isn't going to work. But she was a lovely woman, and a lot of people go to her and kind and all of that. She just was so sorely
Yeah, I know that it's not her fault for not having the information. It is her fault for treating you that way. And again, I use this now, Jamie, a lot because you taught it to me, that whole power frame thing.
Yes.
With doctors and like, I'm sorry, sweetheart, you just obviously didn't go to medical school for 7 years.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to treat you like you didn't.
Yes.
And that's just not, it's just not the way to react to handle human beings. Like, we're professionals in a healthcare space, and professionals are team partners with their patients. They're not in a power frame of authority over their patients. Yes, they do go to medical school and learn everything that's so important to understand how to treat the human body, but they have no right to treat a human being as beneath them. Right. And so if that happens to you out there listening, you have the right to go to another healthcare professional. And you have the right to stand up for yourself too. And I don't mean to be rude to a doctor. I just mean, like Jamie did, hey, I understand, like, you didn't probably learn this in medical school. I totally get it. I'm just, could I send you some information? I would love to just hear your thoughts on kind of something that's new. Because you're right, Jamie, this all came about in the 70s. I mean, John and Lynn Billings was one of the first ones that did an incredible amount of research in this area. They were Australians. Yeah. And so because of that, medical schools haven't caught up to where the science is. And so they just didn't learn about it. Right. And, the CDC just, I think it was 2 to 3 years ago, probably about 3 years ago, had to update their kind of science, what they're telling people about fertility awareness-based methods and how effective they are, because they were still stuck back in rhythm method time in terms of effectiveness. So things are changing slowly, but it's going to take a lot of time. And it's going to take, as I always say, patience to advocate for themselves to change the culture of medicine. Yes.
And then one last thing I want to say too is, in that moment, she assumed that I wanted to avoid pregnancy. Which is fine, but she assumed it. She didn't ask, like, so are you planning on having kids right away, or what's your plan? It was as though if I even had said, oh no, we're wanting to achieve right away, that maybe I would have been dealt in the same way. I don't know if that would be the case or not, but she didn't ask. Like, she didn't even ask. She just assumed it, which that also caught me a little off guard, maybe that's the longing of my heart is to get pregnant right away. Or even like if I had gotten pregnant right away, whether I was on birth control or not, like it wouldn't have meant that I failed or something. Like I think we need to reframe that too at times. So yeah, good conversation. All right, some of these last ones here, we're just kind of ticking right along. Hopefully our listeners are able to maybe relate to some of these stories and are getting a good formed understanding on how they can share some of these things that are, again, misconceptions with their friends. But another really big one before we end here with the last couple is it seems too complicated. So actually what's interesting is the World Health Organization conducted a multi-continent study, including many uneducated women, and found that 94% of the women that were taught NFP were able to identify their fertile symptoms correctly, even on the first cycle. And so while it may seem complicated, and maybe Teresa and I, like when we were talking about femtech, and you're like, whoa, that seems complicated. That it can seem that way. But at the very bare bones basic, our body simply gives us data. And if we are given the sight to see and the understanding and the know-how to understand what I'm looking for, it's not complicated. We see it. And if we don't see these markers, which again, as a reminder, a key, of course, is our period. It marks that we ovulated from the cycle prior. Our main event is ovulation. So we see cervical mucus that gives us information. And anything outside of those two things, besides like dryness at the labia, likely is cause for an appointment. Those are really the two main liquids we're looking for, the two main fluids, the white flow and the red flow. Those are the two things. That seems pretty basic, and it is. There's obviously nuances and caveats to that, but I do want to make sure that if women desire to do this, not to feel so discouraged because it seems like one more thing that seems way too complicated.
Right. And there's different methods for different women. Like there are some methods that feel overly complicated for some women. Like your personality is your personality. And some methods, due to your own temperament and personality, are going to be harder for you than others. So if you're like doing one method and you're like, you're just every day like hating your body because you're like, I can't figure this out, then maybe look into a different type of, fertility awareness based method that suits your temperament better. The other thing is it is true that for some people it is more complicated, and that is because they have a woman's health issue, right? So people with polycystic ovarian syndrome or abnormal bleeding patterns or continuous mucus discharge, that will make it more complicated for you to chart. But in combination with working with a good healthcare provider who understands psycholiteracy and a good practitioner of fertility awareness, those things can be overcome.
Right. Yep. Totally. All right. What about my sex life? So that's another issue. Gosh, if we chart with the natural system, what about my sex life? And while that definitely can be very difficult, and Teresa and I can attest to it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, I want to share a synopsis of some research that was presented in an article published in the Journal of Nursing Scholarship. And I actually got this. The facts website is so amazing. So just go there if you're wanting any like research on any of this information, but this is where I'm getting this information to. They're quoting it. So couples who participated in a study in 2003 were asked to respond to these open-ended questions. So the man and the wife, and the questions were about NFP. So how did NFP help and how did NFP harm the marriage? NFP stands for Natural Family Planning. It's another way to say natural systems of charting to avoid pregnancy or to achieve. So more than 600 individuals shared well over 2,000 comments. That's a lot of comments. And the overwhelming majority, actually, 74% of the comments were positive. But the things that they found to be difficult was that it can cause strain. And women who have high libido, which often we do during our fertile time, it can be difficult. And then that can come again with fears of pregnancy and other things. But the benefits, and again, I'll give a high level and then Teresa and I will dig in. But the benefits, so we think about the strain and the hard things. But 74% of these comments were positive because it overarched the negative. So what they noticed was that there was an enhanced relationship with their spouse, improved knowledge and empowerment, an enhanced spirituality, they noted that the methods they were practicing were successful. So it helped them gain confidence. And then again, the family planning goals, I know for me and my husband, the benefit is that we would actually talk about our family size. Whereas if I was always, if I was birth control and I was constantly sterile and fertile, that wouldn't be a conversation that we would ever need to make or have. So let's kind of dig into some of those, Teresa. What have you noticed has been really good for your marriage? What has been hard, and why do you still choose this, even though sometimes it can be hard?
Well, I would say number one for me, like my sex life with my husband is the greatest it's ever been, and that's just years and years of practice. So what I want people to know is that just because people are on birth control, it's not like their sex life is perfect. And they've done studies also on how many times people have intercourse, whether they're on a contraceptive method versus a natural method, and it's about the same.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I find is that this question gets to the heart of not just sex, it gets to the heart of marriage. And the heart of marriage is that it's not always easy to find a balance where two people can live in harmony together for year after year after year after year. And that's something everybody has to work on. So it can't be this, like, this is the misconception, is like somehow like people who are on birth control, like their lives are just perfect because of that. Like they don't have the same problems, marriage problems. They don't have money problems. They don't have those things. No, like marriage is always hard. And the same things that make a couple struggle with difficulty are going to be the same probably on both ends a lot of the time. But what Jamie and I are saying is a natural method in a lot of ways enhances the relationship so much because of the cooperation of the two people working together in this area that it can help them overcome some of the common struggles that happen in marriage. When you talk about like money is a real common thing, right? But when you're using a natural method, you communicate so flippin' much about that because you're always aware of your own, fertility in a sense. And even if you're like not even thinking about kids or no kids, it's still kind of there in the background because your fertility is a reality to you versus suppressing fertility. So there's just this nature of communication that happens that enhances a relationship. And in some ways, I really do think there's a rhythm that happens when you're using a natural method and you abstain for certain periods of time if you're avoiding pregnancy. The rhythm of coming back to each other creates just this constant renewal, or they used to call it the honeymoon effect. I don't know if I really love that term, but it is this thing where things just kind of, they're like, oh, again and again, we renew this kind of thing. It's important to us, but taking a break from it is also a good thing. And knowing that sex is not the end all be all, using each other, as subjects instead of objects. I mean, we see each other as the subject to one another, not the object. We don't use them as an object, that they're a whole person with a mind, body, and soul. And when you use a natural method, a man sees the woman's body as this thing that he needs to respect and honor. And I think that it's good. And I'm not going to say that's true of all couples either, that it's easy and that it works out that way. But like Jamie said, the statistics would lead us to believe that at least it trends towards well over 50% of people would see this as a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is like a joint thing. It's joint, where if the husband is involved and not necessarily involved in like helping you make observations of your fertility or wiping your vagina or you know what I'm saying, checking your mucus, like your husband's not doing that part. But because of the communication, it increases the shared responsibility. Whereas if, again, the woman has an IUD or is taking the pill or whatever, that's just her. Like it really is. There's not, unless I guess the husband's reminding the woman to take the pill, I suppose, because the husband could remind the woman to chart. But truly, it really does take a shared responsibility, a shared effort. Just like anything, like you're working on it, in high school, you were part of a basketball team. So you work as a team for the goal. Like the goal is to win the game. The goal is to improve your teamwork. I mean, same. It's literally like you are working together, not just on anything. Yes, we can work together to renovate our home. We can work together to budget. We can work together to do lots of things. But why can we why are we encouraged to work together in all these other aspects, but then when it comes to work together for like our life or this joint understanding of that dignity or that those moments, that is like the greatest teamwork opportunity, is that one. So that is another reason why I love that we can use this as a way, like you said, Teresa, not just to like help your sex life or to, again, grow that part, while again people can see it either way, but really to help grow your marriage, because there are the tools that one needs to communicate, our sexual, preferences, even, or like in terms of what we want from each other, or intimacy, or our family planning goals. Those are the same skills we need to communicate about lots of hard things in marriage. So again, they're transferable skills. And I want to bring up two episodes from last season or the season before, I think it was season 3, with Dave Getterman. So we had a guy come in, and actually we interviewed him. If you haven't listened to it, some women are like, this all sounds well and good, but I don't know what my husband's going to say. Like, okay, Jamie and Teresa, you talked me into it. Yep, I want to ditch the pill. I really want to practice natural awareness systems, fertility awareness systems, but I am so nervous. Here's what I want you to do, ladies. Get your pen and paper. And maybe Teresa, we can put this in the show notes too. 2 podcast episodes for your husband, and you listen to them too. Unlocking the Secret Code to Women's Hormones with Dave Getterman. And that's, season 2, episode 31. So that was season 2. And that it went over so well. I got so many comments about this episode. And I know that even some like churches and pastors and priests are having their pre-marriage couples listen to this episode. So we had him come in too for a part 2, and that was season 3, episode 11. So I want to make sure, again, if you haven't listened, that you do that, because that would be, again, advantageous for you and your spouse. Okay. Anything else you want to share with that, Teresa?
That's great. I'm so glad you brought up Dave. I was just talking to him last night. I gave a talk at a college, and I was like, you really need to listen to this episode with Dave.
Yes.
And then, so yes, that's a good, we'll put it in the show notes for sure.
So funny. I was showing my husband, and Dave's probably gonna listen to this episode, but I was showing my husband, like, Dave not always, but he often texts me questions about like the fertility cycle, or about, can you tell me this? Or, hey, did you know this? Or he's always like my inside scoop man. It's just hilarious, because he's like, again, a farmer, not a farmer. He's not a farmer. What am I saying? He sells ag equipment, like he's a man's man. So it's incredible. Yeah. All right. Last misconception here as we tie it up is I don't have anyone around me who can teach me. Like, I'm by myself in this barren land. Everyone around me thinks this is bogus. So what do I do? So good news. You actually have so many options, because the world has gone to virtual as well as in person. So if you don't have in-person contacts, you can find someone virtually very easily. And I'm going to throw out some of the websites or resources that would be good for steps. And then, we can kind of start wrapping it up. So again, if you have a misconception, no one teaches me, or no one around me teaches it, write these down. And again, Teresa and I could put it in the show notes. fertilitycare.org. So that's a website regarding the Creighton method specifically. Managing Your Fertility is also another really great website, which is a collection of methods. Femhealth.org, I believe, is fem-based. So that's another system for charting your cycle. FABMbase.com, again, which is a collection of different systems. And then, of course, if you are wanting to ditch the pill, maybe you are already charting your cycle, or you want to chart your cycle, and you're thinking about ditching the pill, but you're on the pill for a health concern, visit fiatinstitute.com/directory, because many of my hormone coaches I train, they're also trained in a fertility awareness system, but they can also partner that with health coaching for you, hormone health coaching. So again, if you're on the pill for a health concern, and it's not like, again, this endometriosis, PCOS, or even if it is, but you want to work in collaboration with lifestyle management and things that we could do to get to the root, please visit that, because our hormone coaches are incredible. Okay. Any other thing? Maybe Teresa, you want to plug your book quick too?
No, that's fine. I mean, yeah, the Happy Girl's Guide to Being Whole, that has the list of resources in the back of the book, but also an encyclopedia for cycle awareness. So you're certainly welcome to use that as a resource, and that's available on Amazon. And if you get, overwhelmed and lost, just email us at thehormonegenius@gmail.com, and we will help you out. So, Jamie, this is great. I want to be respectful of your time so we don't go too long. So, this is a good episode to share with someone who has a lot of misconceptions about natural methods. And we hope that you're inspired to be as passionate as Jamie was in her 20s to really share this information with her doctor and with a lot of people, and to dig in and do the work and do the kind of research in this area and learn for yourself. You have to believe it, you have to buy into it before you're going to do it. And so we just encourage you to go ahead and get educated. So thanks, Jamie. Appreciate this episode.
Yep. Bye, Teresa.